Well, then, Madam Speaker, I'll yield myself such time as I may consume at this time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, this is a bill, an underlying concept that not only do I endorse and appreciate, but I knew and worked with extensively in the private sector. There's no question in the private sector telecommuting continues to grow. But there are a couple of things I'd like to straighten out here today in consideration of this bill. First of all, Madam Speaker, every member of Congress has a BlackBerry. So do most major members of the federal workforce. Many of us have portable devices like this iPad. The fact is there's no shortage of telecommuting tools presently at use in the federal workforce. We're not talking about the ability to telecommute. We're talking about a new bureaucratic mandate within the federal regime that requires each agency have a specific entity for that purpose, and we're doing so without the safeguards that my motion to recommit offered and overwhelmingly was accepted before the election. When I say before the election, I think it's also important to note this will be the first vote after the American people said no to government waste, fraud, and abuse, government growth, government spending. And yet, the Senate, before the election, stripped out of this bill something as innocuous as each agency having to show that telecommuting addition were going to be net cost savings. In other words, with all the bravado about how this wasn't going to cost, but it was going to save, what was stripped out of this was any kind of an assertion, not an assertion that required an audit, but just an assertion by an agency head that their efforts were going to save money. Now, I was here for the snowstorm of last year, and I just want the American people who may not have been able to be here in Washington, D.C. to understand that it was quite a snowstorm. And I appreciate the estimate of $30 million a day of savings. But I might also remind the American people that every restaurant was open and doing great business. The parks were filled with people having snowball fights. In fact, what really happened was the federal workforce got a paid holiday, while people who had to figure out how to make a buck found a way to get their people to work so they could still sell to those federal workers that were having a holiday. It is, in fact, more common for the federal workforce to say, go ahead and stay home. Now, that probably begs the question of telecommuting. But then the question is, where in this bill do we require people who are telecommuting not to get a day off because of snow since they're in their home where the snow shouldn't be affecting them? We have a lot of safeguards not in this bill. I'm convinced today that with the current majority that this bill will probably pass as it is. I intend to bring back in the next Congress additional reforms and hold oversight as appropriate to make sure that we improve that which is not being dealt with today. I expect I will have the same bipartisan support that we had throughout this process in the House. I'm mostly disappointed that with an overwhelming over 303 votes here in the House for the bill as it was, that it came back to us without things that we thought should be in it. Madam Speaker, I don't want to be a partisan, but I do believe it's important that we consider that one of the items that was in this bill when it left the House was a prohibition on basically union work outside of the cover of office. We have collective bargaining agreements almost universally within the federal government. We also have regulations about these people, whether they have to do other work or not. This bill lacks the safeguard so that somebody can basically take a BlackBerry and a notebook, disappear from forever, and be almost unaccountable as to whether they ever did any of their core work while doing their union organizing and running activity. That's not in the best interest of the taxpayers. It's not what the last election was about. It's not what I'd hoped to see. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I'm prepared to close and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I've said most of what has to be said, and I'm not going to use all the time that the minority has. This bill, as I said, will probably pass, and it will be a shame. I would hope that all Republicans and Democrats who know this could be better and voted for it when it was better would also vote against it. Not because the outcome is certain, but because we have an opportunity to say we're not going to produce a new bureaucracy without some reservation. God bless you. Without some reservation when we know it could have been better. This is not a bill that creates the opportunity for telework. Every agency that sees this bill will look and say, darn, I got to create a special entity that is a telework czar entity. They'll know that for what it is. What it doesn't do is it doesn't give them the kind of additional new guidelines that really would keep this from being, in some cases, just a mandate for a perk, and in other cases, a mandate for an agency creation within an agency. I think that's the most dangerous part of what we do. We should never, never give a federal government a requirement to do something and not give them the guidance, authority, and statute necessary to make sure they do it right. We have that responsibility. The executive branch is, in fact, the administrative branch. For them to administer, we either need to give them the rules or require that they create rules that are sensible and then create oversight for it. That's not what this bill does today. As I said, in no case will this create one new telework job. It simply will create a new bureaucracy. And it does so without any of the protections the motion to recommit, widely accepted by the House, brought before the elections. Additionally, creating efficiency in government is now essential. When we reconvene in January, our problem will be $1.4 trillion worth of spending greater than what the American people are willing to pay or able to pay to fund our government. That means to us that we're going to have to find a way to have less federal workers that cost less, federal workers that need less facilities. So I will continue to support telework if it means that we're not building new federal buildings, we're not causing the infrastructure to grow. In other words, Madam Speaker, that we're saving money. I'm sad to say that this bill, when it's signed by the President, will do none of that. But the President knows, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget knows, the Vice President knows, the House knows, and certainly the Senate knows that we have a long way to go when we talk about private sector telecommuting to be as efficient as the private sector. We are not. What we do is, in fact, we use the word telecommute often to say, well, look, we're using the gadgets, we must be doing better. Madam Speaker, we can do better, we should do better. I understand this is an important vote to many people who feel that the federal workforce needs a perk, a symbol that we're going to do something for them. Madam Speaker, this is not doing something for the federal workforce unless the American people have a confidence that the federal workforce is becoming leaner, more efficient, more effective in doing what the people want done for them. In that case, Madam Speaker, I will recommend that all of my side, and as many as those who will listen on the other side of the aisle, vote no today as a symbol that, in fact, we can do better. The guidance from the Congress should be to increase efficiency and to describe that in a way in which the federal workforce can have confidence that we're on the same team, we're on the same side. We want them to avoid excessive commuting. We want them to be more efficient and effective, but we also want to be a Congress that provides such guidelines as necessary rather than simply a mandate for a new bureaucracy in every agency that is now going to be the telecommuting agency. With that, Madam Speaker, I thank the House for its indulgence and time. I thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle because we did work long and hard to try to get a better bill. We sent the Senate a better bill. We now today can only consider what has been brought before us. I recommend a no and yield back the balance.